Well, let's go ahead and get underway. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Wade Crowfoot, and I lead our California Natural Resources Agency. I'm here in the area of the Palisades fire, actually at the base camp at Zuma Beach in Malibu, where CAL FIRE is working to help organize all of the post-fire work that's happening. Thank you for joining. There's been, of course, so much work over the last 3 weeks fighting these horrific fires and then helping those that were victimized by those fires. And through it all, we've worked to try to provide as much information as possible in as clear and a transparent way as possible. One of the dynamics that we've experienced over the last month, just given the global attention on this, is a lot of important information being shared, but also misinformation. So this discussion here today is just one of our many efforts across our state government, but also with our local and federal government partners to get good information out there. Today's focus will be on more from a wildfire perspective, given the emphasis across our agency in protecting people from catastrophic wildfire. But I'll also share some about all of the assistance being provided and all the work we're doing to help those people whose lives have been impacted by the fire. If many of you have joined these discussions before, these speaker series discussions, but for those who haven't, I want to share a little bit to help make this discussion as productive as it can be for you. There is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and at any point, and that others can see on the Q&A function, and some of those I'll actually directly direct to our panelists. Number one. Number two is we also make use of the chat function. So if you open that up, my colleague Geeta Chandra, who deserves credit for organizing this and all of our speaker series discussions, she'll be staffing that chat function. So she'll provide background on our speakers, for example, or websites they're referring to. And it's a great way to kind of increase the depth of your understanding of what our panelists are talking about. It's also important to note that we're going to be recording this conversation. So by tomorrow, you can go to our agency website or just Google this discussion, and you'll be able to find a recording, including a list of all the all the information provided on chat. So today we're gonna jump right into it. We're gonna hear from the head of CAL FIRE, my colleague, our chief, Joe Tyler. We're gonna hear from Laura Hollander, who directs the flood operations at our major state water agency. We're gonna hear from Forrest Schaefer, who helps to lead the state federal wildfire task force that's driving a lot of the protections that we'll talk about here today. And then we'll hear from Michael O'Connell, who's a really important leader in Southern California, who's the president and CEO of Irvine Ranch Conservancy, to talk about sort of the local perspective on both the fires and then what communities can do moving forward to protect against these horrific fires. I want to just say two things up front. The first is, I think we all just need to continue to recognize the human impact of these fires. Several thousand homes were lost in these two fires, and several 100,000 people were evacuated. And we were with a pastor in Altadena, which is one of the impacted communities, last week, who reminded us that every time we talk about loss of a structure or loss of a home, we're talking about devastation for a family. In some cases, homes that have been lost that have been passed by generation to generation. And so our urgency, our focus that remains now and will remain, is all about helping those that have been impacted by the fires. And then the second is just an acknowledgement of the incredible leadership and the heroism of thousands of first responders, including firefighters, that were on the ground battling these unprecedented conditions for days. As I've said before, when we flee wildfires as they encroach on communities, there are a whole lot of men and women across California that go in the opposite direction and fight those fires. And they did incredible work saving lives and saving homes over the last 3 weeks. So again, big thanks for joining. There's several hundred of us here as part of this discussion, and we'll jump into it. I'm honored to work with Chief and CAL FIRE Director Joe Tyler. Joe has been doing incredible work for several years, broadly on all the work protecting us from catastrophic wildfire, both responding to fire, but also all the things that we're doing up front. And Joe, you've been on the ground for most of the better part of the last 3 weeks on these fires in Los Angeles. So recognizing that we're out of the threat from these specific fires, just give us a sense of what you experienced, what your fire service experienced, 3 weeks ago, yesterday, which would have been January 7th, and then a little bit of the state of play, and then the go forward as well.
Well, thank you, Wade, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joe Tyler. I'm the director at CAL FIRE. And I need to set the stage about CAL FIRE. CAL FIRE is a department within the Natural Resources Agency. We are one of many fire service organizations, over 1,000 across the state of California. As you look at the state of California, we are really broken into 3 jurisdictional areas: local responsibility area, which is incorporated cities; state responsibility area, which is the wildland responsibility of CAL FIRE; and then federal responsibility area, which is the responsibility of our federal partners. And the mutual aid system in California is dynamic, flexible, and works well together between local government, OES, Forest Service, BLM, BIA, National Park Service, and Fish and Wildlife Service. Our federal partners make up 57% of the forested land is their responsibility in California. For CAL FIRE, it's about just over 30 million acres. And to our local partners, it is about the same. And I start that way because where the impact areas of the Los Angeles area wildfires, we have 6 contract counties, but I'm going to focus only on Los Angeles County because of the small footprint of state responsibility area within Los Angeles County. We actually contract and fund a portion of the Los Angeles County Fire Department to be able to protect the state responsibility area within LA County. Now, when fires expand, as they did in this case, we come in and are a supporting agency to their efforts. Now, to set the stage even further, in 2025, we've already had well over 300 fires for over 57,000 acres. And when you compare that to 5-year average, 175 fires for 500 acres, it is significantly a different environment this year. So what got us here was January 7th, or leading up to January 7th through the 28th. We know that we had prolonged warm weather, dry conditions, and Santa Ana winds throughout January. There were 14 days of red flag warnings, and in Southern California, they label some of these when they're significant as particularly dangerous situations. In addition to that red flag warning, there were several major events: January 7th to the 9th, January 20th to the 23rd, and then there were 2 other minor, less significant, notable wind events at that time. But during those 2 times, we had winds that were 24 to 38, gusting 51 to 57, and some peak areas in the fire areas well over 100 miles an hour. We recognize that Southern California had not had any measurable rainfall since April of 2024 that made both the live and dead fuels, the vegetation, critically dry. But in January, after these fires have occurred on January 25th, we did see anywhere between 1/2 inch to 1 inch of rain across the fire-affected areas. Now, as a partner agency, as a state agency, working with Cal OES and working with our federal partners, we did, in fact, pre-position incident management teams, fire engines, hand crews, and aircraft into Southern California. And that helped, in addition to supporting our local government partners and being able to surge into those fires. But as many have asked and as many have questioned, you find yourselves into life safety and rescues in the early stages of these fires, of evacuating people as this fire is moving in a large ember cast area out of the vegetation into an urban environment that we saw on these fires. Now, there were 9 fires between that period of time I'm discussing starting with the Palisades on the 7th of January, the Eaton fire on January 7th, the Hearst fire on the 7th. The Lydia fire and the Sunset fire were on the next day on the 8th. Some of these are smaller fires that we were able to contain. The Kenneth fire occurred on the 9th in Ventura County, followed by the Lilac fire in San Diego, the Hughes fire in Los Angeles and Castaic, and then finally the Border 2 fire. So a total of 9 fires that occurred over this time frame. Now, as of right now, the Palisades fire is showing just over 23,000 acres and is 96% contained. It is important, as we heard, that various types and kinds of structures were destroyed. Well over 12,000 structures were assessed, and of those 12,000 structures, 6,800 plus structures were destroyed in that fire, and that damage assessment is done, and they're just refining data at this point. The Eaton fire in the Altadena area, 14,021 acres, is 99% contained. There is no forward progress on either of these fires anymore. They're just buttoning up small hot spots here and there before calling them 100% contained. In the Eaton fire, over 18,000 structures were assessed of various types and kind, and over 9,400 were destroyed. And certainly, as Wade said, our thoughts and prayers are with those that have been affected, and we will be there all the way to the end through the recovery process. I described all those other fires. They are all 100% contained already in the various areas. But as part of the support, CAL FIRE and our federal partners have incident management teams, and that's part of where Wade is sitting at right now. We have 70 personnel on specialized incident management teams. So the Palisades fire, we brought in an incident management team and went into unified command with LA County Fire, Los Angeles Fire Department, LA Sheriff's Office, and LAPD. On the Eaton fire, that is Team 3. It was at the Rose Bowl. And that was an interesting case where we were supporting in conjunction with our U.S. Forest Service partners who brought in an incident management team as well, in addition to Los Angeles County. The Border 2 fire we had in San Diego had an incident management team assigned there. And now we have an incident management team assigned, and we'll have another one after that related to supporting OES, Department of Water Resources, and our local Los Angeles County and City planning organizations and public works in watershed recovery and soil stabilization. And part of that will be talked about in a little bit as our watershed emergency response team, partially staffed by CAL FIRE, that is really looking at those values at risk in that area. So what are some key takeaways? The key takeaways that I can give you right now is related to this, not just this incident, but what 2025 is going to look like, unfortunately, is I need everyone to be prepared. I need to have people go to readyforwildfire.org, see CAL FIRE safety and preparedness tips for the Ready, Set, Go program. It is so important. It is so important that people sign up for local alerts and warnings through your local alert and warning system and WIA alerts as well. It's important to recognize and monitor to the best of your ability based on critical infrastructure that may be compromised and may make it difficult at times to monitor near real-time fire conditions, evacuation updates, emergency shelter locations, alert California fire detection cameras. You can find all that at our website at fire.ca.gov, or you can subscribe through your lead local agencies of law enforcement and fire. You know, I just want to make a point about our website. We've made some significant advancements there, and there's just a statistic that I thought was interesting. In 2024, the CAL FIRE website had 54 million views throughout the entire year of 2024. There were nearly 74 million views just in the first 28 days of 2025. Now, we know we're not done. We're constantly refining. If you have any suggestions for us in refining that website and providing more information, please let us know. Monitor weather forecasts, especially when you hear about those red flag warnings, so important. Defend your home against wildfires by creating defensible space, and you'll hear a lot more about the Zone 0 and what that means related to moving combustible flammable vegetation away from your home. And then last but not least, heed your warnings to evacuate by your first responders and local law enforcement so they can concentrate on fire suppression versus rescues. Back to you, Wade.
So really helpful. A few questions for you. And I note that Gita put in a lot of this information and these websites into the chat that people can see. There've been a ton of investment in the last several years into CAL FIRE's response. I think you've doubled the number of personnel that you have. Can you talk about just the surge of both people, but also all the planes and helicopters and technology? So I think folks that are following this should know just about the investments that you've made and then how you put that to bear.
Absolutely. There are several initiatives that have occurred, continuing all the way back to the fires we had through the 2010s, 2020, 2021, really showed two things. We have to invest in prevention. We have to invest in forest resilience, and we are investing in CAL FIRE and other organizations as well, whether it be adding nearly 2,500 personnel that'll be brought on over the next 4 years now to provide depth and pool of resources. We've also invested in removing our 12 Super Huey helicopters, replacing them with 16 night flying capable Black Hawk helicopters. And then an important project to me was our C-130 program, started in 2013 with the Forest Service. They gave it up in 2018 because it was not funded and there were delays, but we picked it up after that and continued to have those delays, still having great relationships with the Department of Defense helping us there, but signed over ownership of those in 2024 and now have 2 with tanks, the third one getting tanked now, and plan on having all 7. But in addition to that, forest health and fuels reduction, really important. Tying into technology, like I said, these Alert California cameras, and it's important to go to the Prevent tab on our website. You can find where some of these fuel reduction efforts have really steered or made change in these wildfires through our fuels reduction tracker and through our effectiveness reporting. You can find on that website as well. Just a lot of investments. CAL FIRE is not the only organization. Our conservancies, our fire safe councils, our local, federal, tribal partners, impressive in the work that they're doing, but the work needs to continue.
I mean, it's daunting, these intensity of the Santa Anas, and you experience what we experienced. But Joe, there's been a lot of questions about water and fire hydrants and all of that. Can you talk about these fires, the role that water played, and because there's been a lot of information floating around, some of it I think really, frankly, not accurate.
Yeah, so I will tell you that everybody is still evaluating what could be done better, evaluating infrastructure, and it is not my place specifically to talk about the water infrastructure of Los Angeles City and Los Angeles County. But there are some things to put into perspective when we're looking at water flow capability. Hundreds upon thousands of homes that are affected. Now you have water lines that are broken in those. You take an aerial truck company or a municipal engine or even one of our wildland engines who may be flowing their master streams at 1,000 gallons per minute are obviously going to have an effect on pressure in the system. In addition to that, I know on the Eaton fire, from what I had heard from our first responders, no significant impacts there. The governor commissioned an independent investigation of Natural Resource Agency departments to evaluate the water supply on the Palisades fire, and I believe that that is still forthcoming.
Yeah, and it's worth noting that reservoirs across Southern California are plentiful. Actually,
And
We're
Pierce Wade
having.
is having a little issues here. Sorry about that. You
Okay,
may
am
want
I
to
back?
repeat yeah, you're back. You may want to repeat what you just said. Sorry, Wade.
Yeah, so sorry. We may move to a different connection. Interesting fact is the wildfire down here at the Palisades knocked out most of the mobile and Wi-Fi in the area, and that's been brought back. That's slowly getting back as utilities come online. So we have probably some signal, but not as strong a signal. So I may cut out, but I'll come back in because again, I'm down here at the incident command post for the Palisades fire. But Joe, I was going to reiterate that reservoirs in Southern California are plentiful, above average this year. There's been some notion or some people saying that somehow water management across California impacted the ability to fight these fires. And I want to assure people that that is not the case, that there is a lot of water across Southern California, and that any localized challenges with the hydrants, which may or may not have played a role in how quickly and effectively that fire could be fought, are being investigated as Joe pointed out. So Joe, we're going to come back to you. I guess last question is, what does it look like from here in terms of fire risk in Southern California? I know everyone's sort of on the edge of their seats, a lot of anxiety. As you pointed out, we received some rain yesterday. Where are you at in terms of pre-positioning assets, and what do you expect for the rest of the winter here in Southern California?
That is a good way to close this out. Just because we had a half inch to 1 inch of rain across Southern California certainly does not mean we're out of the wood. There's a fuels and weather advisory by our predictive services unit, who are constantly using fire scientists to look forward into the future. And it is going to take, it just takes a day of wind to dry out that half an inch of rain. I am sure hopeful that we're going to see some more rain, but at this point, we're predicting some above average fire activity across the southern half of the state. And because of that, we have elected to bring ourselves back into a position where we have at least one fire engine in every one of our 237 state stations across the entire state, able to surge into Southern California, as well as our helicopters and our air tankers.
Well, huge thanks, Joe. And I just want to acknowledge the many states that actually sent firefighters, as well as other countries, to surge up. At one point, we had, I think, over 15,000 first responders across firefighters and other first responders on these fires. So just a huge thanks in terms of outpouring of support across the United States. So we talk about where do we sit now after the fires, and I want to bring on Laura Hollander, who leads flood operations for the Department of Water Resources. As I've been educated, one of the biggest challenges after a fire is this post-fire flood and debris flow risk, where you have these burn scars that exist that actually exacerbate risks when the next rains come. So Laura, thanks for joining us. Can you break down a little bit, first of all, share a little bit more in terms of where you work and what you do, and then break down what this phenomenon is, and then how we're facing it in Los Angeles?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Wade. Again, Laura Hollander. I'm the Deputy Director of Flood Management and Dam Safety for the California Department of Water Resources. We are also under the Natural Resource Agency. And yes, after fires, there can be a tremendous risks of floods. The burn scar areas, the soils in those areas do not take in water as it when it rains, and so that can create flash floods, debris flows, mud flows, carry down soil, rocks, other debris at high speeds and at high velocities, and can cause a lot of damage. And so we are working to mitigate against that threat with our partners. It can take 2 to 5 years for the burn scar areas to revegetate to sort of lessen the risk. So we are working in a couple of different areas at the department. The Watershed Emergency Response Team, which Chief Tyler just alluded to, is being led by CAL FIRE and was led. And that group went in and looked at and did assessments of sort of the burn scar areas. What were the risks at value for some structures? Where were the places where they could characterize the highest hazard risks? And then based on that information from the burn scar areas, the Watershed Task Force, which has been stood up and led by Cal OES, one of the largest sort of deployments of folks to work on this. I think over 400 state personnel are working on it, from DWR to the California Conservation Corps and other state partners and LA County. So based on the risk assessments done by the Watershed Emergency Response Team, there are 3 missions that are being stood up and are actively ongoing. One is the Watershed Protection Mission, and this is where we right now have 33 DWR employees in the field deployed as watershed protection specialists, working with crews of CCC crews, the California Conservation Corps. And this team is going into various locations on the Eaton Fire burn scar and the Palisades burn scar, and actually doing watershed protection work. So what this looks like on the ground is straw, wattles, and compost socks and other materials that prevent the ash and other toxic materials from entering the environment in other ways that can affect sensitive habitats, drinking water, and other ways that can contaminate both the urban environment and also our sensitive habitats. So that work is ongoing. There is also a debris flow team on the debris flow mitigation mission. That is where we're putting K-rail, so basically concrete barriers to help direct some of the mud flows that might come down, or debris flows or flash floods to the extent possible. Those are being pre-positioned and being deployed during the last rain event, and looking forward to potentially some rain in February. And then the last part of the mission is the debris basin mission, which is essentially cleaning out debris basins in the LA area. A lot of them had been maintained, and the county has done a good job of doing those cleanouts, also working with our team to make sure those basins are up and functioning for future storms. We are still in flood season. December, January, February are our typically wettest months. So we have pre-positioned 12 different stockpiles of flood fighting materials to the extent that those are needed. We are ready to go. We are looking at potentially some rain in February, so we are ready and pre-positioned. And that's what I have to share. Wade, any questions from you?
Yeah, thanks, Laura. So key takeaways for me are, this is a really important partnership between locals, the state, with federal support. When those fires were still burning, we had experts come together from CAL FIRE, our geological survey of the state. They use complex computer modeling, but then on-the-ground assessments to understand where the risks are greatest of flood and these mudslides or debris flow. You have watershed experts that came down. The county has the county flood control district, which is really important, really strong partnership with the county. They have infrastructure, I think 154 different pieces of infrastructure that are to protect against this post-fire flooding and debris, including these large sediment basins that can look like empty reservoirs, but they exist to bring this mud and debris flow into if it comes to that. And as we experienced last week, they had a clear incident plan that you all worked with them on, that you helped them staff, Conservation Corps members of our National Guard got out there, and all these mitigations. And so it sounded like last weekend went pretty well. There were certainly some debris flow and mudslides that closed the PCH for a little while, for example. But can you just assess how it went last weekend, and then what it looks like moving forward here in the coming weeks?
Yeah, sure. We as the collective, the state and federal and local family had many pre-positioned materials, including those K-rails that I just spoke about. So the rain, while there were some mud flows, they were relatively minor, and more were directed into some of the streets. There were no structure or other damages from those. We are closely, part of my team is a forecasting team that closely watches all of the forecasts, updates forecasts multiple times a day to look at what's coming down the road. And we are seeing that there is potentially the risk for some rain around February 5th. So we are doing everything we can right now to continue pre-positioning and planning. And as the forecast becomes more clear in the next days, we'll make sure whatever areas we see looking like potential risk areas that we have what we need pre-positioned and folks pre-positioned. Another aspect that we are working on is to get an X-band radar system placed down there, which will help us more pinpoint these sort of thunderstorm cells or intense rain cells. Because one thing about mudslides and debris flows, it takes a certain amount of intensity of rain over a short time, but not very much, that can cause debris flows or mud flows. So these radar systems would help us sort of pinpoint locations better.
Thanks. That's helpful to understand. And I'll also note that the county set up a hotline for residents that live close to these slopes or are concerned about flooding risks or debris flow. And so I'll ask Geeta, our colleague, to find that hotline number and put that in the chat as well. And that's for homeowners that can actually have somebody come out or to counsel them in terms of what risks they face and what mitigations are in place or could be put in place to protect their properties. So Laura, thanks for you and the team's good work on this. And as we know, that will continue here in the days and weeks to come.
Thank you.
So I want to shift to our colleague, Forrest Schaefer, who helps to lead this Wildfire and Forest Resilience Task Force. This is a task force that Governor Newsom set up. It's a partnership of the state and federal government. I chair the task force with the head of the Forest Service in the region. It's a really focused, outcome-oriented effort. We've got an action plan to build our resilience to wildfire, to protect communities from wildfire. And we've been working the last several years on making progress before wildfires ever start to protect communities and landscapes. And Forrest, we thought it would be important in this discussion to talk about, set some context for these wildfires. Obviously, Chief Tyler talked about this incredible response to these unprecedented conditions in the case of these wildfires. But I'm hoping you can kind of paint a big picture of what's happening across California and Southern California to protect against these fires even before they start.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Wade. Chief Tyler mentioned the really substantial increases in fire suppression capacity with equipment and resources. And we've really seen a similar increase in the wildfire resilience and mitigation space over the last few years. And this is something I've really seen and felt personally. I worked in planning wildfire resilience and community projects for many years. And 2021 really felt like a turning point. That was the release of the Wildfire and Forest Resilience Action Plan by the task force. And that also aligned with the $2.5 billion surge in investments over the next several years around wildfire and forest resilience. So as I think back to my time before 2021, throughout the state, we're seeing a lot of upstart, really important efforts, but those individual scattered efforts are really now coalescing into this statewide movement focused on wildfire resilience. And the other piece I've seen, again, firsthand in my hometown of South Lake Tahoe, is these investments put into meaningful projects on the ground that made meaningful differences in fire outcomes for my hometown. And so now I have this privilege of working with the task force, where our team isn't just focused on one region or one sector. We're reaching across so many different agencies, so many different disciplines, programs, partnerships, all throughout California. And it's just really inspiring to see all the progress that's being made, both in capacity building and in taking action in all of these different places throughout the state, and to learn about the different approaches that different places in the state are taking to do this. So first, just on our project, I mentioned we've seen those huge historic investments with that one-time funding surge of $2.5 billion starting in 2021 with the Wildfire Resilience Package. And I'm personally very excited that the momentum that we've built gets to continue now with an additional $1.5 billion from the climate bond, in addition to baseline funding that will continue moving that work forward. One of the key ways that we see these investments being turned into projects near our homes and our backyards throughout our communities and forests and wildlands are through grants awarded by CAL FIRE, awarded by state conservancies, among other agencies, often awarded to local collaboratives, to fire departments, to fire safe councils. And even just taking one example, CAL FIRE alone since 2021 has supported more than 500 forest health, wildfire prevention, and tribal restoration projects with nearly $1 billion of funding just since 2021, all going directly into our communities and our landscapes that we value. And these investments are delivering results quickly, and we have the tools and the data to actually show that that's happening. There's over 2,000 projects underway throughout the state. Collectively, the partners of the task force have treated almost 2 million acres over the last 3 years. Another particularly exciting piece is that more and more of these acres are prescribed fire, delivering all the kind of co-benefits that come along with it. Partners used a record amount of prescribed fire, over 250,000 acres in 2023, and that's doubled from 2021. So moving on to what we're focused on, a little bit of a look ahead. We're continuing, we have a big job ahead of us, and we're continuing to really look at ways that we can support the expansion of large landscape and community resilience projects, including finding ways to make our processes across government more efficient, but also being able to support capacity building. One of the key ways we're doing that is we're focused on building tools and resources that do a few things. First, enabling partners on the ground to get their work done faster and easier. And at the same time, making sure these tools are available statewide so that we can better understand our progress and adapt our programs over the time to really connect the dots between local efforts, regional efforts, and statewide priorities and targets. One of the key ways we've done this recently is with the Interagency Treatment Dashboard, and you'll have a link there in the chat to the dashboard in a moment, where we're tracking all of the projects across sectors, state, federal, local, and putting those in one place where that can serve is serving as a project planning tool for project planning on the ground to understand who's working on what where, but also to allow us at the state level to understand our progress. And it can also serve as a tool for firefighters to inform operational decision making to understand where fuel modification is taking place. But I want to end with what I think our most important role is, which is to elevate and support regionally tailored strategies, recognizing that every area in the state, especially Southern California, faces really unique challenges with fire and are developing unique ways and priorities and programs to address them. And it kind of ties into what I think of us as a task force. We're not just a state and federal task force. The task force is really the collective will of all of us working on this movement together that really forms the heart and soul of the Wildfire Task Force. Key way that we're doing this is working through Southern California partners, partners throughout the state, where through the Regional Forest and Fire Capacity Program, these partners are developing regional priority plans. And really putting together that pipeline of resilience projects that are protecting communities and restoring landscapes. So thanks, Wade, for the opportunity to share about all the progress we've seen. I just want to end to encourage all who want to stay up to date with our resources that I mentioned, our meetings, updates on progress and priorities, to subscribe to our newsletter by going to wildfiretaskforce.org. And there's a box to sign up at the bottom of our homepage.
Yeah, Forrest, thanks so much. I imagine that, we're joined by over 600 people here, and I imagine there are a fair amount of people who are in the Los Angeles basin that may have been impacted by the fires, and some joining from far across the state who have contributed in their own ways. For those that are in the basin, I want to just make sure that you understand the resources that are available to those that have been impacted by the fires. Guido will share sort of a centralized website of all sort of one-stop information around where people can get support and assistance. There are 3 disaster recovery centers that are stood up, one in Altadena, one near the Palisades, one in LA. Already FEMA has provided over $57 million of individual assistance. That's just essentially cash to people that have been impacted, that have been evacuated or lost their homes. And we've got people from the federal government, but also state government on the ground helping fire victims actually access all of these federal disaster response programs. In our country, we have a really good system that when Americans are impacted by disaster, whether it's a hurricane in Florida or a flood in Louisiana or a wildfire in California, there are federal resources that can help them survive and keep themselves safe in the near term, and then help them rebuild their lives in the long term. And so we are working with FEMA on that. Know that the impacted communities, we're really focused on removing right now the hazardous materials on parcels that have burned. So this could be propane, it could be lithium ion batteries from an electric vehicle, could even be ammunition. We're working actually, it's the US EPA that is on the ground clearing the most hazardous debris. That's really important because the next step is removing just the rest of the debris from these properties. Obviously enabling residents to get back in there to sift through their properties, but then to help remove the debris off the property so the rebuilding can take place. Our governor has issued, I think at this point, more than 14 executive orders utilizing emergency powers to reduce red tape to the rebuilding, to enabling schools to get back up and running, to avoid predatory solicitations for people to come into the community and take home ownership away from fire victims. So there's just a ton that's happening on the ground to help people. And again, we've tried to provide centralized internet resources here to be able to help you. If you have specific questions, again, use that Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. And if we can't answer the question right now, we'll make sure to get back to you when we can. And then I want to say, for the people that are not living in Los Angeles or may have not been impacted by these fires, I want to remind people that upwards of a quarter of Californians live in an area that could be impacted by wildfire. And if you live in a community that is threatened by wildfire, as many of us do, there are ways that you can engage, whether it's in your local fire safe council. That's really building awareness and organization within communities of how to survive wildfires. There are efforts to establish what are called fire-wise communities to, again, build preparedness in communities. You can plug in with groups in your area that are actually working on these wildfire resilience projects. Forrest mentioned that there's this dashboard that has a map of the whole state that identifies where these fuel breaks and prescribed fires and other projects are happening to reduce wildfire risk. So it's next my pleasure to bring on a colleague from Southern California who is actually going to talk a little bit more from this community perspective. His name is Michael O'Connell, and he leads the Irvine Ranch Conservancy. And the Irvine Ranch Conservancy is a leader in Orange County working with their fire authorities really on how to protect communities before wildfires ever start. And Michael, I'm so glad you've joined us, in part because we're a big state. And so sometimes when people think about wildfire risk, they think about the conifer forests of the Sierra Nevada. And of course, it's very different in Southern California. So I'm just interested for you to share your perspective on the fires and what it means to your communities and what it can mean to other communities in terms of what we need to do from here.
Thank you, Wade. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be part of this. And thank you for the wonderful setup. I mean, the main point that I want to make this morning is that fire in Southern California is different. It's unconventional. It's not what we think of in terms of forest fires, where there's a lot of overgrown trees and dead trees like we see in the Sierras. We have shrublands in Southern California, and our fires behave very, very differently. In fact, as we've seen in the last 3 weeks, it's radically different. We were really fortunate in Orange County to make it through this particular set of wind events without any major fires, but we've had our share. The 1993 Laguna Beach fire destroyed hundreds of homes and impacted thousands of people, and we've had many large fires since then. This is a problem that we share throughout coastal Southern California, and the problem is the same, but it's very different. It's very unconventional. And so the old ways of thinking about these fires, how to prepare for them, how to prevent them, even how to fight them, just don't work. Conventional fires are driven by fuels like dead trees, and they're driven by physical features. Our fires in this region, our catastrophic fires, the ones that do the damage, are driven by winds. And they are started by ignitions, many of which are along roadways. A lot of them are also along the power line infrastructure. We have a choice. We can either turn off the wind, good luck with that, or we can stop the ignitions and try to prevent as many of these fires as we can before they start. So if these fires are radically different, what does radically different thinking look like? And that's what we've been exploring here in Orange County. First, it's understanding what the problem actually is. It's ignitions and winds. Fortunately, it's not ignitions every single day. It's ignitions during these red flag warnings, during these Santa Ana wind events, which right now occur maybe 20 days a year. Now, we've had a very, very long one recently, but they average about 20 days a year of these severe fires. Second, or severe wind events. Secondly, it's not expecting the fire department to solve the problem. One of my good friends in the fire service has a saying, which is the problem with wildfire is it's everyone's problem and it's no one's problem. The issue is too complicated and too difficult, and it requires everyone doing something. It's in fact, in our area, it's not removing vegetation at the landscape level, like removing all vegetation. You talked about trying to change some of the misinformation that's out there. In many places, taking out most of the vegetation in these areas actually makes the problem worse because it replaces harder to burn vegetation with easier to burn vegetation and easier to ignite vegetation, and it actually makes it worse. So ignition prevention, number one, that's an unconventional thought. We've got to try to prevent ignitions along roadways, and not every day, just during the worst winds. The second is strategic fuel modification. Chief Tyler mentioned fuel modification zones around communities, defensible space. That's not actually to stop the fire from burning, it's to give the fire agencies the space they need to try to defend the homes. So it's not for passively stopping the fire, but to give the firefighters an additional tool. The third thing, and I think it's something that was truly brought out to the front in this last set of tragedies, is structure hardening and resilience. Most of our homes burn due to embers, not from flames. The embers come out. I was trying to think of a metaphor when I was preparing for this that is what it's like to think unconventionally about this. And the thing that I thought was, this is like a volcano sending out sparks all over the landscape. In the Eaton fire, there were dozens and dozens of homes being lit on fire by embers blown by these winds over an extremely wide area. That makes it nearly impossible for the fire department to respond when this many homes are being lit on fire at the same time. And so if we think about what's causing this is the embers, and we think about how to harden our structures against ember cast, that is an incredibly important thing to do. So these three things operate together. You can't have ignition prevention without structure hardening because we're never going to prevent all ignitions. I'd like to prevent 90% of them, but if we can't, we have to have structure hardening. We also have to have strategic fuel modification. These three things work together, and we can't have two of three. We have to have all three. I also want to note for you, Wade, that these things are not fire department things. They require everyone to be involved. So what we've done in Orange County is brought everyone together that is being affected by these fires, from the utilities to the landowners to community representatives to municipalities, and we're working together through a working group that we call COAST, and it's a fire prevention working group that is focused on trying to get all of these things done as responses to both prevent as many fires as we can and be prepared for the ones that we aren't able to prevent. COAST then works regionally with the groups that Forrest mentioned through the Regional Forest and Fire Capacity Program to work on common challenges that we all have. I think if you were to talk to someone from San Diego or talk to someone from Santa Barbara, you would, instead of me, you would get the same issues. We all have these things in common. So working regionally brings together a powerful coalition to try to just think differently about how we deal with these very, very different fires. I'd just like to close by complimenting you personally, as well as the administration, on your leadership, and particularly recognizing that fire in Southern California is different, it behaves differently, and the solutions are going to be different, and we've all got to get involved.
Michael, thank you so much. You know, to me, one is I always find it so helpful to have leaders like yourself who actually, you know the specific risks that your communities, your region faces. And I think that's one of my key takeaways over the last several years in this role, helping to lead the task force, is wildfire resilience is not a one-size-fits-all in California. Different regions have different challenges and different solutions. And Michael, you and others in Southern California have done an incredible job educating me and the legislature, the governor, on just what's needed in Southern California. So now these state funding, the state funding that is flowing into Southern California is meant to flow through these regional groups and ultimately through decision makers like Michael and his group Coast, so that the public funding is actually going to where it's needed most. So for anybody joining us from wherever you are in California, know that there are leaders like Michael doing this work in and around your communities. And as he pointed out, it's not just a fire department challenge, it's an everyone challenge. And there's so much of the work that we can do before wildfires ever come to help actually survive and thrive despite these threats. Michael, the other takeaway or sort of thing you remind me is just the power of these ember-driven fires. We saw it, 3 weeks ago yesterday. I spent some time with firefighters up Mandeville Canyon who were building a defense line, and one of them who was there on that Tuesday talked about it as a hurricane, but instead of rain or water, you had embers. And you can find this online, and we've seen these ember-driven fires in Northern California as well. Where the embers actually go out in front of the fire line. And the difference between a fire-safe home or something that's been hardened to wildfire and one that hasn't is oftentimes the difference if a structure survives or not. And I believe there's an assessment happening across these communities that have been impacted in Los Angeles to understand better what homes survived. And I have a strong confidence that a lot of this will be related to home hardening.
I agree.
So big thanks. I want to bring back the group here for our last 5 minutes. There have been a lot of good questions that have been asked through the Q&A. We've worked to respond directly to those that we could. But I'm interested, as we bring back the group onto the screen, what sort of this has been such a challenging moment in time for Los Angeles, for California, given the impact of these fires, given a lot of the information, and again, sometimes misinformation. I mean, what do you draw from this moving forward? What's sort of a key takeaway that you'd have the several hundred people here, leave this conversation with? And I want to turn to Joe first, Chief Tyler.
Well, here's my key takeaway, and Michael's comments summed it up well. Actually, everybody summed it up well. We have found ourselves in a situation in which California needs to become more resilient, but it's not just about fuels reduction, fire breaks. It is about community risk reduction. It is about hardening our homes, making homes that were built in the 50s, 60s, and 70s brought up to date in today's fire and building codes. Now that costs money, and I recognize that costs money, and that is a heavy, huge ask of people. There are low-cost retrofits that are available. The questions that have been asked, I dropped in a link to the low-cost retrofits that are available on our Office of the State Fire Marshal website. But it is an all-in approach. It's going to take everybody, fire service, fire safe councils, fire-wise communities, local, state, federal, tribal partners together.
Thanks so much.
If I might, I'd like to just underscore what Chief Tyler just said and point out that we spend hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars on fire suppression and other conventional ways of dealing with fire. All he's doing is describing a reallocation of our resources, even though it is expensive, to the things that might work better.
It's so true. And a bunch of questions about what do we mean by home hardening? I think Joe makes a great point. Some of it, it can be as things as large as changing the material of your roof, which are of course expensive. But then there's also things like putting screens over your chimney that are not that expensive that actually reduce embers from going into the chimney. So there's a whole lot of information resources, some of which have been provided here. And I'm quite confident wherever you live, there is an organization in or around your community that's actually working on this that has resources for you as well. Laura, we're halfway through the winter. We always vacillate between, wanting a lot of rain and snow for water supply, but being worried about it for floods. What should we take away from this discussion from a water and flooding perspective?
Yeah, I would say in addition to building the resilience that we just talked about, I think everyone always needs to be prepared. As we're seeing, we can go directly from a fire threat and really dry temperatures, record dryness, right into a mudslide, debris flow, flash flood risk. So being prepared, making sure you have all the contacts and information and notifications that you can, and stay alert to local officials, but be prepared for a myriad of different things that can happen in this kind of environment.
Thank you. Forrest, key takeaways.
Yeah, I just want to build more on what Chief Tyler just said, because it just really struck me in thinking around the fact that there's such an important responsibility around the state for people to prepare their homes and their families for wildfire and for evacuation. What hit me is that these projects together, what we're doing as governments, what we're doing as fire safe councils, local partnerships, and individual homeowners really does add up more than the sum of its parts. One fuel reduction project or one piece of defensible space or one fire prepared home doesn't get us to the same level as really the ultimate effect we have by combining all these programs together. Landscape resilience, community protection, individual and neighborhood and community preparation just really adds up. And I think what we're seeing in throughout the state is reinforcing that.
Yeah, thank you for that, Forrest. I guess the last thing I would say is we will be here, through the recovery and the rebuilding as we work to always be with these wildfires. We're best when we come together across California and the country, and the outpouring of support has been incredible, and it's needed here given the scope and the destruction. Geeta, I want to ask you to lastly on the chat, drop in one last website, and that is ca.gov/LA fires. And that is essentially the one-stop shop for information, both about sort of the current status of fires or floods, assistance that victims can get, but also if you want to contribute philanthropically, or you want to contribute your time and energy or your expertise to this effort. More broadly, I'll just say, as Chief Tyler did, please take every opportunity to educate yourself on this risk and to prepare to keep you and your family safe. We have done so much to reduce catastrophic wildfire risk, but we face worsening conditions, warmer temperatures, and more extreme weather. So all of our efforts are going to make a difference, not only in our own communities, but across the state. Thank you so much, panelists, for joining us. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. If you have any questions or follow-ups or suggestions on other discussions we can be having, you can email us at secretarysuggestions@resources.ca.gov. Thanks so much and take care.